So as we come to the end of another exciting year of Bible Unlocked, we've sort of come full circle, haven't we? As Dan mentioned, we sort of began with this idea of this Emmaus conversation. And tonight we want to look at it with a little more detail, considering some of the things that we've looked at and learned hopefully this year. So this is actually a section of the Bible that Sam in our very first episode looked at, this road to Emmaus conversation. It's a powerful scene where the Lord Jesus Christ has been raised from the dead. And unbeknownst to two of his disciples, he begins to have this conversation with them as they're walking to Emmaus. They're simply walking and talking. And Jesus begins to explain some of the things that have been happening. The disciples are a bit confused. And it says in Luke 24, beginning at Moses and all the prophets, this is the Lord Jesus Christ, unrevealed as of yet to these two disciples, he expounds to the disciples in all the scriptures things concerning himself. What an amazing conversation that would be. And hopefully throughout this year, and hopefully as we consider tonight, we'll look at some of the things that Jesus might have been talking about. And hopefully some of the things that we talk about tonight will be really familiar because we've already looked at so many of the exciting things from the scriptures, from Moses and the prophets, that the Lord Jesus Christ could have been talking to these two disciples about. So let's just recap. Let's picture what's going on in this scene. So it's the third day after Jesus has been crucified. So Jesus has been cruelly crucified on the cross, and 3 days later, this conversation happens. So there's two of them that went that same day to a village called Emmaus. So they're going on a long journey after these events, these disciples, and they talk together about all the things that had happened. So all these things they're discussing, they're bantering back and forth, discussing what happened. Why didn't things happen the way they thought they were going to? And all of a sudden, they come across this man, and it says their eyes are holden that they should not know him. So here's the stranger. To us, we know it's the Lord Jesus Christ, but to these two disciples, they don't know who this is. And the stranger asks them, what are you talking about? And they begin to expound all the things that had happened. So 3 days prior, they tell him that Jesus was crucified, the one they thought was the Messiah. And just that very morning, Mary and other women, they found an empty tomb where the Lord Jesus Christ had been buried. The apostles, Peter and John, they raced to the tomb as well, and they found it exactly as the women had said. All that were there were some grave clothes and a napkin that was bound about Jesus' head. And finally, they tell the stranger about these men, angels, who revealed that Jesus is no longer buried in the tomb. These are amazing things that are happening. This is the context of the conversation that we're looking at tonight. And yet here's two disciples, despite all this, that Jesus said he would rise again, that there's evidence that he has indeed risen, and yet there's two disciples heading back home. Sort of like they're leaving the party a little bit early. Now, they don't know that this man is the Lord Jesus Christ. They're not going to find out who this man is until the very end of this conversation. But can you imagine the Lord? Can you imagine the two disciples? Can you just picture the scene of what's going on in your mind? This is a remarkable event that is recorded for us in the Bible. Now, the Lord Jesus Christ responds to them. Now, they sort of are in the point where seeing is believing, but the Lord Jesus Christ, he corrects them here. Unbeknownst to them, it's the stranger correcting them, but he says, "O fools, and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken." He says, don't you understand what the prophets said? Ought not Christ to have suffered these things and to enter into his glory? The stranger corrects their misunderstanding. You see, the disciples, they knew the Old Testament scriptures about the Messiah, but they didn't quite understand them all. And so this stranger, he expounds all the scriptures concerning the Messiah, from Moses all the way through the prophets. He begins to give what we've called as the best Bible class that was ever given. He explains the scriptures in a way that no man had ever explained to them before. And for the rest of their journey, the Lord Jesus Christ, the stranger that these two disciples had met, would give them this Bible class. He'd expound the things that Moses spoke about. He'd expound the things that the prophets prophesied of the coming Messiah. And when they came to their destination, The two disciples, they were enthralled. They didn't want to let this stranger go, and they invite him into their house to share a meal with them. And the Lord Jesus Christ, he betrays all manner of custom. He goes into their house and he takes the bread and breaks it and blesses it and hands it to them. And as soon as they share this meal with the Lord Jesus Christ, the disciples' eyes are opened wide. They recognize, they know, they understand who this stranger was. This wasn't just some random person that they happened across. The disciples had met the risen Lord Jesus Christ, and all of a sudden, Jesus is gone. As quickly as he enters the scene, he's gone. And what did the two disciples do? Well, they immediately rushed back on their 12-kilometer journey back to Jerusalem. It doesn't matter that it's now into the afternoon, into the evening. They run quickly back to Jerusalem and they share with the rest of the disciples what has happened to them. Their belief is totally and completely changed. Perhaps they had doubted before, but now they had absolute surety that the Lord Jesus Christ had been raised from the dead. And not only that, they would be able to explain to their fellow disciples all these new and amazing things that Jesus had expounded to them. They could share the points about Moses and the prophets that spoke of the Messiah. What an amazing picture. What an amazing record that we have for us, friends, about this conversation that happened on the road to Emmaus. Now, for hours, you can just think about it. What was the Lord Jesus Christ talking about? What things was he sharing with his disciples that would help them be encouraged in their faith? I mean, we can imagine how slowly we might have walked, hearing the words of the Master. We could have perhaps dragged our feet a little bit, eager to get a little bit more information out of this stranger who seems to know so much more than even the best rabbis and teachers in the land. Now, can you just imagine what the Lord Jesus Christ revealed to them? What passages he would have unraveled, what psalms he would have made clear, what prophecies he would have made known, what peculiar verses and passages he would have made plain. From Moses and all the prophets, expounding to the disciples the things concerning himself. Well, no doubt the Lord Jesus Christ, he would have taken them back to Genesis chapter 22. He would have revealed that the Messiah was going to be a descendant of Abraham, just like Jesus of Nazareth was. He would have taken them back to this amazing passage from Genesis chapter 3. It would show that this Messiah would be born of a woman, and that he would come to reconcile people to God, and would crush evil at his own hurt. The Lord Jesus Christ himself being crucified. He would reveal that the Messiah would be a great prophet, just like Jesus. And yet he would be speaking God's words to the people. So many times Jesus would talk about him bringing the Father to the people, bringing the words of God to the people to help them understand. Now, Jesus would also take them through the prophets. He would show how that the coming Messiah was to be born in Bethlehem, exactly where Jesus was born. He would show them the passages and explain that the Messiah was to be born to a virgin. We look at the record at the beginning of the Gospels, and that's exactly what happens with Mary. The angels explain it to Mary and Joseph about the amazing events that were happening, about this virgin birth. Jesus would take them through the passage of the Emmanuel prophecy, which just so happens to be the very name that the angels told Joseph that they should call Jesus, God with us, Emmanuel. And perhaps Jesus would take them through Isaiah chapter 40, which showed that the Messiah would be preceded by a forerunner. And that's exactly what happened with Jesus. Before Jesus enters the scene, John the Baptist, the prophet from the wilderness, comes and prepares the people for a greater than he to come. It's exactly what happens with Jesus. And Jesus would take the disciples through so many passages like this and others and begin to connect the dots for them, to show them exactly what the Old Testament showed would happen when the Messiah came, what type of individual he would be, the mission that he would have, the events that he would do. And he would slowly begin to paint the picture for the disciples that, yes, this was Jesus of Nazareth. He was the Messiah revealed in Moses and the prophets. All the events that happened to Jesus were prophesied before times. Jesus came to fulfill all these things. No doubt, Jesus would also have taken them through some of the passages that we've looked at in the last couple of weeks. Psalm 22, Psalm 69, Isaiah 53. He would have painted the picture of the suffering servant who was rejected and abused, who was derided, condemned, numbered with the transgressors, pierced, betrayed, crucified, and raised 3 days later. Friends, what would it have been like to be with those two disciples as they walked along the road to Emmaus? Can you imagine the many passages and the references, the life events that they perhaps had shared, that Jesus would go to the Old Testament to find proof for all these things happening? What about the entry of Jesus into Jerusalem at the very end of his life? Let's just look at this one detail a little bit more. If the two disciples were there when the Lord Jesus Christ entered triumphantly into Jerusalem, well, this memory would be vivid and burning in their minds. They would not soon forget something like this. So let's look at this record from Matthew's Gospel. So as they come near to Jerusalem, Jesus tells his disciples to find a donkey and a colt and to bring them with him. No doubt perplexed, confused by this very strange request, the disciples oblige and they go find the donkey and a colt and they bring them to the Lord. And Jesus rides upon the beast. And as he enters into the city, great multitudes, they spread their garments in the way. They cut down branches from trees and they stray them in the way. There's this amazing reception. The disciples would be flabbergasted by the response that the people were giving. And not only that, but the people cry out saying, "Hosanna to the Son of David. Blessed is he that cometh in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest." Why did all this happen? Perhaps in the moment you're just overwhelmed with the amazing event that was occurring. But all this happened that it might be fulfilled. Even as he's going to Jerusalem, as he's going to the biggest trial of his life, the Lord Jesus Christ is fulfilling the prophecies that spoke of the coming Messiah. He's fulfilling this prophecy from Zechariah chapter 9 that said, "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, thy king cometh unto thee. He is just and having salvation, lowly, riding upon an ass, and upon a colt the foal of an ass." Jesus fulfilled this verse perfectly. He rode upon the beast. The very people of Jerusalem helped fulfill the prophecy. They rejoiced greatly. They shouted for joy. They cried out, "The king is coming. Hosanna to the Son of David." And this was to help show them that the very one who came riding upon the beast was as described in Zechariah's prophecy. He was just and had salvation coming with him. The people were supposed to be able to put these ideas together. But perhaps they needed a gentle nudging and reminder of the Lord Jesus Christ, as these two disciples perhaps did, that Jesus came to fulfill all these prophecies. He was a just king riding into Jerusalem, having salvation with him. Imagine the Lord Jesus Christ recounting this event to the disciples. This vivid memory that would have burned in their minds. The joyous entrance of the Lord Jesus Christ, the Messiah. And friends, there's so many different passages that Jesus could have talked about as he expounded from Moses and the prophets. And in his wisdom, the Lord would pick the best passages that would help the disciples the most. If they were there for certain events, no doubt he would help bring the fuller picture to their minds, to get them to see the bigger picture of all the things that had occurred. You see, the disciples' understanding of the Messiah would be confined to what they knew about the Old Testament. Over the course of the afternoon, the Lord Jesus Christ would enlighten them, would broaden their understanding. To fully understand Jesus and his work, we need a perfect harmony of both the Old Testament and the New Testament. It was definitely a strength to the disciples there that day. And friends, it can be a strength to us as well, a comfort and an anchor to our faith. And as we bring our thoughts to a close for this section of our webinar tonight, one thing that this passage really makes me look forward to in the kingdom is getting to have conversations like this. getting to walk alongside the disciples and to hear how the Lord did so many wonderful things in their lives. To be able to talk with David and Moses, to talk to Ruth and Hannah and Mary, and hear about the lives of these faithful men and women of old, and how they were encouraged to look forward to the coming of the Lord Jesus Christ, and to look forward to the time when the Lord Jesus Christ would set up God's kingdom upon the earth. Imagine your very own Emmaus conversation. What an amazing thing to look forward to.